"Excuse me, dear, these napkins are finished. Go fetch another stack from the kitchen, would you?" The woman didn't look at my face when she said it. She barely looked at me at all. To her, I was just a pair of hands holding a tray, a dark smudge in the corner of a room filled with pristine black silk and polished diamonds. I stood there, freezing, my fingers tightening around the silver tray I hadn't even realized I was holding. The scent of white lilies was so thick in the air it tasted like metal in the back of my throat. That smell, cloying, sweet, and suffocating, is something I will never forget. It smells like lies. I looked down at the woman. It was Cynthia, my father's wife, the woman who had stood by his side on magazine covers and charity galas for 30 years. Up close, her makeup was flawless, a mask of grief that didn't quite reach her eyes. She snapped her fingers, a sharp, dry sound that cut through the low hum of conversation. "Did you hear me? The napkins. And while you're back there, tell the catering manager the champagne is too warm." I wanted to scream. I wanted to drop the tray, let the crystal glasses shatter against the marble floor, and scream, "I am not the help. That man in the casket is my father." But I didn't. I swallowed the lump of fire in my throat. I looked at the closed mahogany casket at the front of the room, surrounded by wreaths of flowers that cost more than my car, and I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. "Of course, ma'am," I whispered. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I wasn't a maid. I wasn't a server. I was Elena, and I was about to learn exactly what my family thought of me when they thought no one was watching. To understand why I took that tray, you have to understand where I came from. My name is Elena Joy. My mother, Maria, was a beautiful, soft-spoken woman who worked in the archives of a massive corporate law firm in the city. That was where she met him, Robert Sterling, the CEO, the titan of industry, the man whose name was on the side of the building. It's the oldest story in the book, isn't it? The wealthy, powerful man and the quiet, lovely employee. They fell in love, or at least something like it, but Robert Sterling had a reputation to uphold, a merger to secure, and a social standing that didn't include a Dominican archivist from a walk-up apartment in Queens. So, when I was born, there was an arrangement. He didn't leave his wife Cynthia, he didn't claim me publicly, but he didn't abandon us either, not entirely. Every month, a check arrived. It was enough to keep us comfortable, enough to put me through good schools, enough to ensure I never went hungry. And once a year, on my birthday, a letter would come. They were never long, just updates on his life, polite questions about my grades, and a signature, "Sincerely, Robert." I hated him for a long time. I hated that I had to watch him on the news, receiving awards, holding hands with Cynthia, and hugging his two real children, my half-brother Julian and half-sister Paige. They were the golden children. They went to skiing trips in the Alps. I went to the public library. They drove Porsches at 16. I took the subway. But as I got older, the hate turned into a dull ache. My mother passed away when I was 22. Cancer took her quickly, brutally. Robert paid for the treatment and he paid for the funeral, but he didn't come. He sent a wreath of white lilies, that same suffocating smell. After Mom died, the letters changed. Robert started writing more. He wrote about his regrets. He wrote about how lonely it was in his big house, how his children only called when they needed money, how Cynthia was more of a business partner than a wife. He sounded tired. He sounded human. We started writing back and forth. For 5 years, I was his confessor, his secret pen pal. I never asked for money. I was a head nurse at a busy hospital by then, making my own way, and I think he was shocked by that. I was the only person in his life who didn't want a piece of his fortune. Then, last week, the call came. It wasn't Robert. It was his personal attorney, Mr. Henderson. His voice was gravelly and grave. "Elena," he said, "I'm sorry. Robert passed away last night. Heart failure." I sat on my kitchen floor, the phone pressed to my ear, and stared at the peeling paint on my cabinet. I didn't cry immediately. I just felt unfinished. "He wanted you to be at the funeral," Henderson continued. "He was very specific about that. The service is at the estate on Tuesday. You need to come." "Do they know?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Does his family know about me?" There was a long pause on the line. "They know Robert had indiscretions. They don't know you specifically, but you have a right to be there, Elena. Please." So I went. I took a day off from the hospital. I put on my best black dress, a simple, modest A-line dress I'd bought on sale at Macy's. I pulled my curly hair back into a neat bun. I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic up the winding driveway of the Sterling estate, past iron gates that looked like they were guarding a fortress. The driveway was lined with cars that cost more than my entire education: Bentleys, Mercedes, a sleek red Ferrari. I parked my Honda way in the back, near the service entrance, hoping to stay inconspicuous. It was raining lightly, a gray, miserable drizzle. I walked to the front door, clutching my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I kept telling myself, "You are here to say goodbye. You are here for him. You don't need them to like you." A man in a tuxedo opened the heavy oak door. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my scuffed heels and my plain dress. "Service entrance is around the side," he grunted, already looking past me to a couple approaching behind me. "I'm here for the funeral," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a guest." He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but stepped aside. "Coat check is to the left." I walked into the foyer. It was cavernous, with a chandelier the size of a car hanging overhead. The air was cold and hushed. Dozens of people were milling about, holding champagne flutes, speaking in low, respectful tones. I felt invisible. I was the only person of color in the room besides the actual servers, who were weaving through the crowd with silver trays. I stood near a pillar, trying to get my bearings, trying to spot the casket. That's when Cynthia walked by. I recognized her instantly from the photos. She was thinner in person, sharper. She was talking to a tall, handsome man who looked just like Robert, my half-brother Julian. "I just want this over with," Cynthia hissed, her voice low but carrying in the acoustic perfection of the hall. "The board is meeting on Friday. We need to secure the assets before the vultures start circling." "Don't worry, Mother," Julian said, checking his Rolex. "The old man is gone. We run the show now. Just smile and shake hands." My stomach churned. The old man. Is that what Robert was to them? An obstacle? I took a step forward, intending to just find a seat in the back of the viewing room, but as I moved, a young woman, my half-sister, Paige, bumped into me. She was holding a half-empty glass of red wine, a few drops sloshed on the floor. She stopped and looked at me, her eyes glazed and bored. She didn't apologize. She didn't even ask if I was okay. She just thrust the glass toward me. "Here," she said, "take this and find someone to clean up that spot before someone slips. God, can't you people pay attention?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned. "Excuse me, dear. These napkins are finished. Go fetch another stack from the kitchen, would you?" The woman didn't look at my face when she said it. She barely looked at me at all. To her, I was just a pair of hands holding a tray, a dark smudge in the corner of a room filled with pristine black silk and polished diamonds. I stood there, freezing, my fingers tightening around the silver tray I hadn't even realized I was holding. The scent of white lilies was so thick in the air it tasted like metal in the back of my throat. That smell, cloying, sweet, and suffocating, is something I will never forget. It smells like lies. I looked down at the woman. It was Cynthia, my father's wife, the woman who had stood by his side on magazine covers and charity galas for 30 years. Up close, her makeup was flawless, a mask of grief that didn't quite reach her eyes. She snapped her fingers, a sharp, dry sound that cut through the low hum of conversation. Did you hear me? The napkins. And while you're back there, tell the catering manager the champagne is too warm." I wanted to scream. I wanted to drop the tray, let the crystal glasses shatter against the marble floor, and scream, "I am not the help. That man in the casket is my father." But I didn't. I swallowed the lump of fire in my throat. I looked at the closed mahogany casket at the front of the room, surrounded by wreaths of flowers that cost more than my car, and I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. "Of course, ma'am," I whispered. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, my heels clicking softly on the floor. I wasn't a maid. I wasn't a server. I was Elena, and I was about to learn exactly what my family thought of me when they thought no one was watching. To understand why I took that tray, you have to understand where I came from. My name is Elena Joy. My mother, Maria, was a beautiful, soft-spoken woman who worked in the archives of a massive corporate law firm in the city. That was where she met him, Robert Sterling, the CEO. The silver tray was heavier than it looked. My wrists ached, a dull, throbbing pain that radiated up my arms, but I welcomed it. The physical pain was grounding. It gave me something to focus on other than the surreal nightmare unfolding around me. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. That is the superpower of the service staff. People see the uniform, the tray, the lowered eyes, but they don't see the person. They don't lower their voices when you walk by. You are furniture to them. You are a wall with ears. I circled the perimeter of the grand salon, collecting empty champagne flutes. The room was a sea of black designer fabrics. I smelled Chanel No. 5, stale tobacco, and that overwhelming scent of lilies. I stopped near a cluster of men standing by the fireplace. My half-brother, Julian, was at the center of the circle. He was 32, 2 years older than me. He had our father's strong jawline, but his eyes were different. Robert's eyes had been warm, crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Julian's eyes were flat and predatory. I pretended to adjust a stack of cocktail napkins on a side table so I could linger. "The timeline is aggressive, I know," Julian was saying, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "But the market is volatile. We need to liquidate the commercial holdings in Jersey before the end of the quarter." A shorter, bald man nodded nervously. "But Julian, your father, he built that division from the ground up. He always said it was the heart of the company." Julian let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "My father was sentimental. Sentimentality is expensive. The old man lost his edge 10 years ago. He was holding on to dead weight because he liked the history of it. I'm interested in profit." I gripped the edge of the table. Dead weight. Robert had written to me about the Jersey division. He told me it was where he hired his first employees. He told me he kept it running even when profits dipped because 50 families relied on those jobs. Julian wasn't just talking about selling buildings. He was talking about firing 50 families before our father was even in the ground. "What about the estate?" the bald man asked. "This place?" Julian looked around the room with a sneer. "Too big, too much upkeep. Mother wants to keep the penthouse in the city, obviously. We'll list this monstrosity as soon as the will is probated. I've already got a developer interested in the land. They want to raise it and put up condos." Raise it? This house was where Robert had planted a rose garden for his mother. It was where he had his library, the sanctuary he described in his letters as the only place he felt peace. And his son was planning to bulldoze it for condos? I felt a surge of nausea. I wanted to throw the tray at Julian's perfectly tailored suit. I wanted to shout, "He loved this place. He loved those people." But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. "Not yet," I told myself. "Listen, learn." I turned away, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and nearly collided with a woman stumbling out of the hallway. It was Paige, my half-sister. She was 26, blonde, and strikingly beautiful, but she looked like a wreck. Her mascara was slightly smudged, and she was gripping a fresh glass of wine with white-knuckled intensity. She wasn't grieving, she was unraveling. "Watch it!" she snapped, steadying herself against the wall. "I'm sorry, miss," I murmured, stepping back. She squinted at me, her eyes unfocused. You, get me some water, with ice, lots of ice. Of course. I hurried to the bar, poured a glass of ice water, and brought it back to her. She drank it in 3 large gulps, some of it spilling down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, unladylike and raw. God, she muttered more to herself than to me. This is taking forever. When do they put him in the ground so we can leave? I froze. I couldn't help myself. He was your father, miss, I said softly. Paige looked at me sharply. For a second, I thought she recognized the challenge in my voice, but then she just rolled her eyes. He was a checkbook, she spat. He wasn't a father. He was never around, and when he was, all he did was judge me. Paige, why did you drop out? Paige, stop spending so much. He didn't know me. She let out a bitter laugh. Probably he loved his secretary more than he loved us. The irony hit me like a physical blow. He didn't love his secretary, my mother, but he did love the daughter the secretary gave him. He knew everything about me. He knew my favorite book. He knew why I became a nurse. He knew I was afraid of thunderstorms. He knew me because I let him. Paige pushed him away, and now she was rewriting history to justify her coldness. I'm sure he loved you in his own way, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Whatever, she said, shoving the empty glass of water into my hands. Just take this away. You're hovering. It's creepy. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly the ice rattled in the glass. I leaned against the stainless steel counter, trying to breathe. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just grieving differently. They were vultures circling a carcass. They didn't mourn the man. They mourned the inconvenience of his existence. Hey, you! The catering manager snapped his fingers at me again. Stop daydreaming. The widow wants fresh champagne in the VIP room now. He shoved a fresh bottle of Dom Perignon into a silver bucket and thrust it into my arms. And keep your mouth shut in there. Mr. Henderson is reading the preliminary brief. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. My pulse spiked. This was it. The will reading wasn't supposed to happen until tomorrow at the office, but Cynthia, impatient and powerful, must have demanded an early briefing. I took the bucket, I smoothed my dress, I walked out of the kitchen and down the long hallway toward the library, the VIP room. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. I didn't knock. I slipped inside, quiet as a shadow. The library was dim, smelling of old leather and pipe tobacco. Robert's smell. It made my eyes sting with fresh tears. Cynthia was sitting in Robert's high-backed leather chair behind the massive desk. She looked like a queen on a throne she had conquered. Julian was leaning against the bookcase. Paige was slumped on a sofa. Mr. Henderson, an elderly man with kind eyes and a nervous tick in his jaw, was standing in front of the desk clutching a leather folder. I don't understand the delay, Arthur, Cynthia was saying, her voice sharp as a razor. It's a standard will. Everything to the spouse, residual trust to the children. Why all the secrecy? Why did you insist on sealing the document until tomorrow? I stepped forward, moving to the side table to set down the champagne bucket. No one would. The silver tray was heavier than it looked. My wrists ached, a dull, throbbing pain that radiated up my arms, but I welcomed it. The physical pain was grounding. It gave me something to focus on other than the surreal nightmare unfolding around me. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. That is the superpower of the service staff. People see the uniform, the tray, the lowered eyes, but they don't see the person. They don't lower their voices when you walk by. You are furniture to them. You are a wall with ears. I circled the perimeter of the grand salon, collecting empty champagne flutes. The room was a sea of black designer fabrics. I smelled Chanel No. 5, stale tobacco, and that overwhelming scent of lilies. I stopped near a cluster of men standing by the fireplace. My half-brother, Julian, was at the center of the circle. He was 32, 2 years older than me. He had our father's strong jawline, but his eyes were different. Robert's eyes had been warm, crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Julian's eyes were flat and predatory. I pretended to adjust a stack of cocktail napkins on a side table so I could linger. The timeline is aggressive, I know. Julian was saying, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But the market is volatile. We need to liquidate the commercial holdings in Jersey before the end of the quarter. A shorter, bald man nodded nervously. But Julian, your father, he built that division from the ground up. He always said it was the heart of the company. Julian let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. My father was sentimental. Sentimentality is expensive. The old man lost his edge 10 years ago. He was holding on to dead weight because he liked the history of it. I'm interested in profit. I gripped the edge of the table. Dead weight. Robert had written to me about the Jersey division. He told me it was where he hired his first employees. He told me he kept it running even when profits dipped because 50 families relied on those jobs. Julian wasn't just talking about selling buildings. He was talking about firing 50 families before our father was even in the ground. What about the estate? The bald man asked. This place? Julian looked around the room with a sneer. Too big, too much upkeep. Mother wants to keep the penthouse in the city, obviously. We'll list this monstrosity as soon as the will is probated. I've already got a developer interested in the land. They want to raise it and put up condos. Raise it? This house was where Robert had planted a rose garden for his mother. It was where he had his library, the sanctuary he described in his letters as the only place he felt peace. And his son was planning to bulldoze it for condos? I felt a surge of nausea. I wanted to throw the tray at Julian's perfectly tailored suit. I wanted to shout, he loved this place. He loved those people. But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Not yet, I told myself. Listen, learn. I turned away, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and nearly collided with a woman stumbling out of the hallway. It was Paige, my half-sister. She was 26, blonde, and strikingly beautiful, but she looked like a wreck. Her mascara was slightly smudged, and she was gripping a fresh glass of wine with white-knuckled intensity. She wasn't grieving, she was unraveling. "Watch it!" she snapped, steadying herself against the wall. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, physical. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pressed against our eardrums. I slowly walked over to the mahogany desk, my desk, legally speaking, and placed the silver tray down on the leather surface. The crystal glasses clinked softly, a delicate sound that rang out like a gavel strike. I unpinned the small white apron from my waist, I folded it neatly into a square, I placed it next to the tray. "You asked for more champagne," I said, looking down at Cynthia, "but I think you've had enough." Cynthia stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. The flawless mask of the grieving widow cracked, revealing the panicked, furious woman underneath. Her eyes darted from my face to the lawyer, then back to me. "Is this a joke?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but not with sadness, with rage. "Arthur, is this some sick, twisted joke? You hired a waitress to play a prank at my husband's funeral?" "It is no joke, Cynthia," Mr. Henderson said. He stepped up beside me, his presence a sudden shield. "This is Elena Sterling, Robert's daughter, and as of midnight last night, she is the legal owner of this estate and the primary shareholder of Sterling Industries." "You're lying!" The shout didn't come from Cynthia, it came from Julian. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate, just like he probably did in boardrooms. "Who are you?" he spat, his breath smelling of scotch and aggression. "Some scam artist? Did you sleep with the old man? Is that it? You blackmailed him into writing this insanity?" I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked up at him, meeting his glare with a calm I didn't know I possessed. It was the same calm I used in the ER when a patient was thrashing and screaming, the calm of knowing you are the one in control. "I am your sister, Julian," I said softly, "and I suggest you step back. You're standing in my personal space." "I'll throw you out myself," he snarled, reaching for my arm. "I wouldn't do that," Mr. Henderson warned sharply. "Assaulting the executor of the estate on the day of the funeral? The board would have your resignation before the police report was even filed." Julian froze. His hand hovered inches from my shoulder. He looked at Mr. Henderson, saw the steely resolve in the old lawyer's eyes, and slowly lowered his hand. He backed away, running a hand through his perfect hair, pacing like a caged tiger. "This is insanity," Julian muttered. "It's undue influence. He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. We'll contest it. We'll bury you in court." "You can try," I said, "but I have the letters." That stopped them. "What letters?" Cynthia asked, her voice sharp. 5 years of correspondence, I told her, handwritten, dated. In them he details exactly why he made this decision. He writes about your spending, Cynthia. He writes about Julian's gambling debts in Macau that the company quietly covered. He writes about how Paige hasn't spoken to him in 2 years unless she needed a deposit for a new car. I looked at Paige then. She was still sitting on the sofa, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked like a child who had been caught stealing candy. "He wasn't senile," I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room with authority. "He was heartbroken. He watched you all waiting for him to die so you could cash out. He knew you wanted to sell the Jersey division. He knew you wanted to raise this house for condos." Julian whipped around. "How did you—" "I was holding the tray, remember? The help is invisible. You said it yourself. You assumed I was furniture, so you spoke the truth. And now I know exactly what your plans were." Cynthia slowly stood up. She smoothed her skirt, trying to regain her composure, trying to summon the icy matriarch persona she'd worn for 30 years. "So," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with venom, "so you're the avenging angel, is that it? The secret bastard child coming to punish the wicked stepmother. It's very dramatic, dear, very telenovela, but you have no idea how this world works. You're a nurse. You empty bedpans. You think you can run a multinational conglomerate?" She walked around the desk, stopping inches from me. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. "We will eat you alive," she hissed. "You don't know the board. You don't know the investors. You're a tourist in our world. Take a settlement. Arthur can write you a check for $1 million right now. Take it, go back to Queens, and buy yourself a nice little life, because if you stay, I will destroy you." It was a good speech. Terrifying, actually. A week ago, it might have worked. A week ago, I might have taken the check and run. But I remembered the woman outside the pharmacy last month, crying because her husband had been laid off from the Jersey plant, a rumor of closures already circulating. I remembered Robert's shaky handwriting in his last letter. "Protect what matters, Elena. Don't let them strip it for parts." I looked Cynthia in the eye. "I don't want $1 million, and I don't want your permission." I turned to Arthur. "Arthur, please have security escort my family out of the library. I need to review the funeral itinerary. I find the current arrangements lacking." "You can't kick us out," Paige shrieked, finally finding her voice. "This is our house." "Actually," Mr. Henderson said, checking his watch, "technically the title transferred upon death. It is Elena's house, and she is asking you to leave the room, not the funeral, just the office." Cynthia looked at me with pure hatred. If looks could kill, I would have been in the casket next to Robert. But she knew she had lost this round. She knew that making a scene now with half of New York's elite just outside the door would be social suicide. "Fine," Cynthia spat. "Play your little game. Enjoy the view from the chair, honey. It's a very lonely seat." She marched to the door, head held high, refusing to look back. Julian followed, bumping my shoulder hard as he passed, muttering a curse word under his breath. Paige scrambled after them, casting one terrified, confused glance at me before disappearing into the hallway. The heavy door clicked shut. Suddenly, it was just me and Mr. Henderson. The adrenaline that had been holding me up vanished. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from falling. "Are you all right, Elena?" Mr. Henderson asked gently, stepping forward to offer me a chair, one of the guest chairs, not the big leather one. "Not yet." I sank into it, shaking. "I think I'm going to sick." "You did well, Elena," Mr. Henderson said, pouring a glass of water from the sideboard. "Better than I expected. Robert was right about you. You have a steel spine." I took the water, my hands trembling so much I had to use both of them to hold the glass. They hate me. They really, truly hate me. They fear you, Mr. Henderson corrected. There is a difference. They fear you because you are the only variable they couldn't calculate. They thought they were playing chess, and you just flipped the board. I looked around the room. The books, the dark wood, the smell of tobacco. It felt massive. It felt suffocating. I don't know how to run a company, Arthur, I whispered. Cynthia was right. I'm a nurse. I know how to triage a gunshot wound, not a merger. Mr. Henderson smiled, a small, sad smile. Robert knew that, Elena. He left you the company to manage the day-to-day operations. He left you to set the moral compass. He left you a team of advisors. He left you me. Your job isn't to know the stock price. Your job is to decide what the company stands for. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. And, he added, he left you this. He told me to give it to you only after you had faced them. I took the envelope. It was heavy. On the front, in Robert's shaky script, was written, "For the boss." I let out a wet, choked laugh. I tore it open. Inside wasn't a legal document. It was a flash drive and a single note. Elena, the wolves will come for you. They will try to say I was incompetent. They will try to say I didn't know you. This drive contains video diaries I've recorded for the past 3 years. Every conversation I had with Julian about his incompetence. Every threat Cynthia made. Every reason why I chose you. If they try to fight you, play this in court, play it for the board. I gave you the gun, honey. Don't be afraid to pull the trigger. I stared at the drive. It was a weapon, a nuclear option. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me ammunition. I closed my hand around the cool metal of the flash drive. The shaking in my hand stopped. "Arthur," I said, standing up. I felt different now. The uniform felt like a costume I had finally taken off. "Yes, Elena?" "The funeral service starts in 20 minutes. I need to go change." "Change?" "I have a dress in my car. It's not black, it's navy blue. My father always liked me in blue, and I'm done hiding in the back." I walked to the door. "And Arthur?" "Yes?" "Tell the catering manager if he snaps his fingers at me one more time, he's fired." Arthur grinned. "With pleasure." I walked out of the library and back into the hall. The air was still cold, the crowd was still murmuring, and the scent of lilies was still choking. But as I walked toward the service exit to get my bag, I didn't lower my head. I walked down the center of the hallway. People turned to look. They saw a woman walking with purpose. They didn't know who I was yet, but they were about to find out. The rain had picked up by the time I reached my car. It was drumming a steady, mournful rhythm on the roof of my Honda Civic. Inside, the air was stuffy and cold, smelling of old coffee and the vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. I stripped off the black catering uniform in the back seat. It felt like peeling off a layer of dead skin. I pulled my navy blue dress from the garment bag. It was simple, elegant, falling just below the knee, with long sleeves and a high neck. My mother had helped me pick it out for my nursing school graduation years ago. She said blue was the color of truth. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My hair was a little messy from the humidity. I took the pins out, letting the dark curls fall around my shoulders, the way my father liked them. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick. My hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just Elena the nurse anymore. I was Elena Sterling, and I had a funeral to attend. When I walked back toward the main entrance, the security guard, the one who had directed me to the service entrance earlier, stepped in front of me. "Miss," he said, holding up a hand, "private ceremony, guest list only." I stopped. I didn't look down. I looked him right in the eye. "I know," I said. "I'm on the list. Check under family." He scoffed, opening his clipboard with a bored expression. "Family? I doubt that. What's the name?" "Elena Sterling." His finger scrolled down the list. He paused. He blinked. He looked at the paper, then at me. Then back at the paper. I don't see a... He squinted. Wait, it's handwritten at the top. Executor. He looked up at me, his face draining of color. The arrogance vanished, replaced by confusion and sudden deference. My apologies, Miss Sterling. I wasn't informed. Please, go right in. He opened the heavy door for me. This time, I didn't walk to the side. I walked straight into the foyer. The guests had moved into the great hall for the service. It was a massive room with vaulted ceilings and rows of velvet chairs facing the casket. The room was packed. Hundreds of people, business partners, politicians, socialites, sat in hushed silence. At the front, in the first row, sat the trio, Cynthia, Julian, and Paige. Their backs were to me, rigid and tense. Julian was already at the podium. His voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and practiced. "My father was a man of vision," Julian was saying, gripping the sides of the lectern. "He built Sterling Industries not just with bricks and mortar, but with integrity. He believed in family. He believed in legacy. And as we stand here today, my mother, my sister, and I pledge to honor that legacy by continuing his work with the same unwavering strength." It was a good speech. If you didn't know he was planning to sell the company for parts and fire 50 families, you might have believed him. I stood at the back of the room for a moment just listening. The hypocrisy was physically painful. It tasted like bile. I started walking down the center aisle. My heels on the marble floor made a distinct click-clack sound that cut through the silence of the room. A few heads turned in the back row, then a few more. I kept my eyes on the casket. It was closed, covered in white roses. Julian faltered. He saw the movement in the crowd. He looked up, squinting against the lights. When he saw me, a woman in navy blue, walking down the center aisle while he was speaking, his jaw tightened. He stopped speaking. The silence rippled forward like a wave. Everyone turned, hundreds of eyes fixed on me. I saw confusion. Who is she? Is she a mistress? A crasher? I didn't stop walking until I reached the front row. Cynthia turned around. Her eyes widened in horror. She made a motion to stand up as if to block me, but Mr. Henderson, who was sitting directly behind her, leaned forward and whispered something in his ear. She froze, gripping her purse until her knuckles turned white. She sat back down, seething. I walked past them. I walked up the 3 small steps to the podium. Julian was still standing there, paralyzed. He looked at me, and for a split second the microphone caught his whisper. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I didn't whisper. I reached out and gently but firmly adjusted the microphone. "I'm here to say goodbye to our father, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, amplified by the speakers, echoing through the hall. A gasp went through the room. The audacity, the scandal. Julian looked at the crowd. He looked at the board members in the 3rd row. He realized that dragging me off stage would look worse than letting me speak. He was trapped. He shot me a look of pure hatred, turned on his heel, and marched back to his seat next to Cynthia. I stood alone at the podium. I gripped the wood. It was warm from Julian's hands. I looked out at the sea of strangers. I saw the judgment. I saw the curiosity. I took a deep breath. "My name," I began, "is Elena, and for 30 years most of you didn't know I existed." The murmuring stopped instantly. You could hear a pin drop. "I didn't grow up in this house. I didn't ski in the Alps. I didn't drive a Porsche. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. I'm a nurse. I work 12-hour shifts. I pay my own bills." I looked down at the casket. I knew Robert Sterling, not the CEO, not the Titan. I knew the man. I knew that he hated Earl Grey tea but drank it to be polite. I knew that his favorite book was The Old Man and the Sea because he identified with the struggle against something you can't conquer. I knew that he was lonely, even in a room full of people. I looked directly at Cynthia. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. I wrote to him, I said, every month. And in those letters, he didn't talk about stock prices. He talked about regret. He talked about the heavy cost of living a life that looks perfect on the outside, but feels empty on the inside. I paused. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive. I didn't plug it in. I just set it on the podium, in plain sight. Cynthia's eye snapped to the small silver device. She knew. She remembered the threat. He left me a task, I said, my voice hardening slightly. He asked me to protect what he built, not the money, the people, the workers in Jersey who have been with the company for 20 years, the staff in this house who are treated like furniture. I saw the catering manager in the back of the room. He was standing by the door, his mouth agape. There are rumors, I said, addressing the room at large, specifically the board members. Rumors that Sterling Industries is going to be sold, broken up, liquidated for quick cash. I leaned into the mic. Let me be clear. I am the executor of the Sterling estate. I am the majority shareholder, and as long as I draw breath, this company will not be sold. No one is getting fired to fund a condo development. No one is stripping this legacy for parts. The room erupted. It wasn't applause. It was a chaotic mix of gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. The board members were leaning in, talking frantically to each other. Did she say executor? Who is she? I looked at Julian. He had his head in his hands. Paige was crying, real tears this time, tears of embarrassment. My father made mistakes, I said, bringing the room back to silence. His biggest mistake was thinking that love could be bought. It can't. Loyalty can't be bought. It has to be earned. He learned that too late, but he gave me the chance to make it right. I stepped back from the podium. I picked up the flash drive and put it back in my pocket. Rest in peace, Dad, I whispered. I've got it from here. I walked down the steps. I didn't go back to the seat. I walked toward the casket. I placed my hand on the polished wood. It was cold. Goodbye, I mouthed. Then I turned and walked down the center aisle toward the exit. I expected silence. Instead, as I passed the third row, an elderly man stood up. It was Mr. Abernathy, one of my father's oldest business partners, a man Julian had called a dinosaur earlier. He nodded at me, a slow, respectful nod. Then another person stood, a woman I didn't know. By the time I reached the back doors, half the room was standing. They weren't standing for Cynthia. They weren't standing for Julian. They were standing for the woman whom had just saved the company. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the rain. The air felt cleaner now. The smell of lilies was gone, replaced by the scent of wet earth and ozone. I walked to my car, my legs trembling again. I got inside and locked the door. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. I had done it. I had dropped the bomb. But as I put the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you won? This is just the first inning. Watch your back, sister. I looked at the screen. I didn't reply. I put the car in gear and drove down the long, winding driveway past the iron gates. I knew the war. I thought the hard part was standing at the podium. I thought the hard part was looking my stepmother in the eye and telling her she was finished. I was wrong. That was just the opening bell. The real fight didn't happen in a church or a funeral home. It happened in the headlines. 2 days after the funeral, I woke up to my phone buzzing so hard it nearly vibrated off the nightstand. It was 5 a.m. I had 3 missed calls from Mr. Henderson and 52 notifications from news apps. I opened the first one. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The nurse who nursed a grudge, illegitimate daughter accused of manipulating dying CEO." There was a photo of me, a terrible one taken from a distance in the hospital parking lot, looking tired and disheveled in my scrubs, placed next to a glamorous airbrushed photo of Cynthia and Robert at a gala. The article was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed I had isolated Robert in his final months. It quoted an anonymous family source, Julian, obviously, saying that Robert was suffering from dementia and that I had coerced him into changing his will while he was medicated. It painted me as a gold digger who preyed on a sick old man. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking. They were trying to destroy my reputation before I even walked through the front doors of the company. I called Mr. Henderson. "Don't read it, Elena," he said immediately. His voice sounded tired. "They're saying I drugged him, Arthur. They're saying I'm a criminal." "It's a smear campaign," Arthur said. "Standard operating procedure for a hostile takeover. They want you to panic. They want you to quit. Are you going to quit?" I looked around my small apartment. I looked at the framed photo of my mother on the dresser. She had worked cleaning offices before she got the archive job. She had scrubbed floors so I could have piano lessons. She never quit. "No," I said. "I'm not quitting. When is the board meeting?" 9 a.m. They moved it up. Julian is going to call for a vote of no confidence. He wants to remove you as executor before the ink is dry. "I'll be there," I said. Walking into Sterling Tower was a different kind of battlefield. The building was glass and steel, piercing the Manhattan sky. I parked my Honda in the CEO's reserved spot in the underground garage. The valet looked confused, but it didn't stop me. I took the elevator to the top floor, the 40th floor, my father's floor. When the doors opened, the silence was deafening. The receptionists, the assistants, the junior executives, everyone stopped what they were doing to stare. It wasn't the polite curiosity of the funeral. It was cold, judgmental. They had all read the papers. To them, I wasn't the boss, I was the villain. I walked straight to the main conference room. Inside, the air was stale with tension. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around a table that cost more than my apartment. Cynthia was there, sitting at the far end, looking like a panther waiting to pounce. Julian sat at the head of the table, my father's seat. He didn't stand when I entered. "You're late," Julian said, checking his watch. "And frankly, given the allegations in the press this morning, I'm surprised you showed your face." "Get out of my chair, Julian," I said. I didn't shout, I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, clutching my purse, looking at him. Julian laughed. He looked around the table, inviting the others to join in. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. "This is a board meeting, Elena, for serious people, not for whatever this is. We're discussing the future of the company, a future that doesn't include you." He tossed a folder onto the table. "We have a motion on the floor to freeze the assets of the estate pending a competency hearing regarding the late Robert Sterling's mental state, and to appoint an interim CEO, me." He looked at the board members. "All in favor?" Hands started going up. 1, 2, 3. Cynthia raised hers with a smug smile. "Wait." The voice came from the door. It was Mr. Henderson, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man in a grease-stained jumpsuit. He looked out of place in the pristine boardroom. He was holding a hard hat. "Who is this?" Cynthia snapped. "Security." "This," I said, stepping forward, "is Frank Miller. He's the foreman of the Jersey manufacturing plant." I had called Frank on the way over. I had never met him, but I knew his name from my father's letters. "Frank is the heart of that place," Robert had written. "He knows where every bolt goes." Julian sneered. "This is a boardroom, Elena, not a union hall. Get him out." "Frank," I said, turning to the man, "tell them what Julian visited the plant to discuss 3 weeks ago." Frank looked nervous, twisting his hat in his hands, but then he looked at Julian and his expression hardened. Mr. Julian came down, Frank said, his voice gravelly. He brought some men in suits, developers. They weren't looking at the machines. They were measuring the lot lines. Mr. Julian told me to stop ordering raw materials for next month because production wouldn't be necessary. A murmur went through the board. "Lies," Julian shouted, standing up. "The man is a liar." "I have the purchase order cancellation right here," Frank said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, signed by Elena Sterling, dated 2 days before Mr. Robert died. I walked over and took the paper. I slid it down the table to Mr. Abernathy, the elderly board member who had stood up for me at the funeral. Mr. Abernathy put on his glasses. He read the paper. His face turned purple. "Julian," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice low, "you told this board that the Jersey plant was underperforming. You said the closure was a necessary efficiency. You didn't tell us you had already sold the land to a condo developer." "It's a strategic pivot," Julian argued, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "The margins in manufacturing are dead. I was saving us money." "My father didn't build this company on margins," I said, stepping into the space Julian had vacated. "He built it on trust. You lied to the board, you lied to the workers, and you lied to your father on his deathbed." I looked at the board members. The hands that had been raised were slowly lowering. "You have 2 choices. You can vote for Julian, the man who strips this company for parts and lies to your faces, or you can vote for me. I don't know everything about business, but I know that selling our soul for a quick buck is the beginning of the end." I placed the flash drive on the table, the same one from the funeral. "And if that's not enough," I added softly, "I have videos of Julian covering his gambling debts with company funds. Shall we watch those together, or shall we skip to the vote?" The silence in the room was absolute. Julian looked at the flash drive like it was a cobra. He knew what was on it. He sat down, defeated, his face pale. Cynthia stood up. "This is blackmail." "No, Cynthia," I said. "It's accountability, something this family isn't used to." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "I move to reject the motion to freeze the assets, and I move to confirm Elena Sterling as the chairwoman of the board, effective immediately." "Seconded," a woman across the table said. "All in favor?" Every hand went up, except for Julian's and Cynthia's. "Motion carries," Mr. Abernathy said. He looked at me and nodded. "Welcome to the table, Miss Sterling." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I looked at Julian. He was staring at the table, defeated. "Julian," I said, "you're fired." He looked up, shock registering in his eyes. You can't do that. I'm family." "No," I said, "you're an employee, and you just cost this company too much credibility. Pack your office. Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at his mother for help, but Cynthia was already looking away, calculating her own survival. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I turned to Cynthia. "And you?" I said. Cynthia stiffened. "I don't work here. You can't fire me." "No," I agreed, "but I can cut the allowance. The estate pays for your penthouse, your driver, and your social calendar. As of today, that funding is under review. If you want to keep your lifestyle, you're going to stop the leaks to the press, you're going to stop the lies, and you're going to publicly support this transition." Cynthia narrowed her eyes. "And if I don't, I then release the rest of the videos, the ones where you talk about how much you despised Robert, the ones that will make you a pariah in every social circle in New York." Cynthia stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. Then she picked up her purse. "You really are his daughter," she whispered. It wasn't a compliment. It was an admission of defeat. She walked out. I was left alone with the board, 12 pairs of eyes staring at me, waiting for orders. I looked at Frank, the foreman, still holding his hard hat. "Frank," I said. Go back to Jersey, tell the crew the plant stays open, tell them we're hiring a second shift. Frank grinned, a wide, toothy smile that lit up his tired face. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As he left, I sat down in my father's chair. It was big. It was intimidating, but for the first time, 6 months later, the snow had melted and the world was beginning to turn green again. I drove up the driveway of the Sterling estate one last time. The for sale sign at the gate was discreet, tasteful, but final. I hadn't moved into the mansion. I tried spending one night there just to see what it felt like. I walked through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing off the marble. I sat in the grand dining room where I had once cleared plates. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a museum of a life I never wanted. So I listed it. The proceeds were going into a trust to secure the pension fund for the Jersey plant workers. It felt like the right kind of poetry, selling the house that pride built to save the people who actually did the work. I parked my car, a new Volvo this time, safe and reliable, but still not a Ferrari, and walked around the back to the rose garden. This was the only part of the estate I couldn't bear to sell. I had carved out this acre of land, legally separating it from the main deed. It would remain a public park, dedicated to Robert Sterling. I found Paige sitting on a stone bench near the budding bushes. She looked different. The heavy makeup was gone. She was wearing jeans and a thick sweater. She looked younger, softer. When she saw me, she didn't sneer. She didn't look at me like I was the help. She just offered a small, tentative smile. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I told you I would," I replied, sitting on the other end of the bench. "How is school?" "Hard," she laughed, a dry sound. "Design school is no joke, and it's weird being the oldest student in the class, being the one who has to take the subway." "But you're doing it," I said. "Yeah, I am." She looked down at her hands. "Julian is still furious, you know. He calls me every week screaming about how we should sue you again, how you stole our birthright." "And what do you tell him?" Paige looked out at the garden. "I tell him that for the first time in my life, I sleep at night. I tell him that I'd rather be a broke student than a rich liar." She turned to look at me. "You know, Dad used to talk about you. I didn't know it was you he was talking about at the time. He just said, 'I know a girl who is brave.' I used to get so jealous. I wanted to be the brave girl." Tears pricked my eyes. "You're brave now, Paige. Walking away from Cynthia and Julian, that took guts." She shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I just got tired of the cold." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet box. "I found this in Dad's safe deposit box. It had your name on it. Cynthia hid it, but, well, I stole it back before I moved out." She handed it to me. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a simple gold locket. I clicked it open. Inside was a tiny faded photo of my mother, Maria, laughing, holding a baby, me, and engraved on the inside cover were 3 words, "My true north." I let out a shaky breath, clutching the locket to my chest. He hadn't just loved me, he had loved her. In his own flawed, broken way, we were his center. "Thank you," I whispered. Paige stood up. She looked at the mansion looming behind us, the empty shell of the Sterling dynasty. "Are you really selling it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "It's just a house, Paige. It's not a home. We have to build our own homes." She nodded. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was stiff, awkward, but real. "See you around, sis," she said. "See you, Paige." I watched her walk away, down the path, toward her own life. She had lost her fortune, but she had found her dignity. Later that afternoon, I went to the cemetery. It was quiet. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I walked to the family plot. There was Robert's grave, and next to it the empty spaces reserved for Cynthia and the children. I knelt down in the dirt. I didn't care about staining my dress. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. I placed a single white rose on the stone, not a lily, a rose. I did it, I told him. The plant is safe. Frank got his second shift. The stock is stable. The vultures are gone. I traced the letters of his name with my finger. But you were wrong about one thing, I said. You said I was stronger than you. I'm not. I was just hungry. I was hungry for the truth, and hunger makes you do crazy things. I thought about the last 6 months, the board meetings, the late nights reading legal briefs, the way the staff at the office looked at me now, not with fear, but with respect. I remembered what it felt like to hold the tray. I'm going to be okay, I whispered to the stone. We're going to be okay. A wind picked up, rustling the trees. It felt like a hand on my shoulder. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. I put the gold locket around my neck. It felt heavy, warm, and right. I walked back to my car. I didn't look back at the grave. I didn't need to. He wasn't in the ground. He was in the work I was doing. He was in the second chance he gave Paige. He was in the fight. I started the engine and drove out of the cemetery gates, merging onto the highway. The city skyline sparkled in the distance, a million lights in the dark. I wasn't the maid anymore. I wasn't the secret. I was Elena Sterling, and I had a company to run. You know, they say that blood is thicker than water, but I learned something different that day at the funeral. I learned that loyalty is thicker than blood, and dignity is stronger than any diamond. My stepmother and brother had everything. They had the name, the money, the status, but they were poor in the things that actually matter. They were bankrupt in kindness. It would have been easy to take the money and run. It would have been easy to let them win, to stay invisible, to stay safe. But sometimes life hands you a tray and you have to decide, are you going to serve or are you going to flip the table? I flipped the table, and yes, it was messy, yes, it was scary, but when I look in the mirror now, I don't see a victim. I see a woman who stood up when everyone expected her to kneel. So I have to ask you, have you ever let someone treat you like the help in your own life? Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, even when you knew you should scream? Maybe it's time to put down the tray. Maybe it's time to walk down the center aisle and tell them exactly who you are. Because the truth is, you are not defined by how people treat you. You are defined by what you tolerate. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have fired your own brother? Would you have forgiven the sister who ignored you? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Voices of Auntie May. We have so many more stories to tell, and we can't do it without you. Until next time, stay strong and remember, even the quietest voice can shake the world.